But first and foremost, Greg Rusch, Grace Community United Methodist Church.
Yes.
You are director of student ministries
Yep.
and director of Young Life in our area.
Yep.
Give us a little bit about your background and how you got into these doors of ministry.
All right. So without being too long-winded and boring, I went to a private school from 4-year-old kindergarten through 9th grade. My parents had divorced. I went to a public high school, and I was like, what is going on here? Because private school is completely different from public high school. Didn't get involved in church stuff at all until I met my girlfriend, who was my fiance, who was my wife, and she was going to a church, a Methodist church. And I said, okay, I'll go. And started going, and about a month into it, volunteered to be on the sound crew. About 6 months later, I was the sound crew leader, and I remember going to the membership class, and I'm like, what are you doing here? I was like, well, I'm not a member yet. They're like, are you in charge of the sound crew? I said, yeah. So I guess very early on, I realized like, hey, I can be involved in some type of leadership with the church. And we moved to be closer to my job. I'm a degreed mechanical engineer and did that for 18 years. And we went to a church because the pastor looked like our former pastor, and my brother-in-law and sister-in-law had been going there. So we said, that's a perfect reason to go. Don't volunteer anything too soon. And about a month after, I was back in the sound crew, hanging out, working with them. And then tried little things like men's ministry stuff. I went and did Habitat work days. I was just involved and didn't say no to lots of things. Maybe should have said no to some things, but didn't. And then a friend of mine was the youth pastor, and he asked me to be involved in confirmation class with him as like an adult mentor. And I said, okay, like that sounds cool. And he said it starts in, I don't know, 6 months or something like that. Well, unfortunately, before class started, he was no longer with the church, and his replacement said, hey, I heard through the grapevine that you were going to help him. Will you help me? And so I said, sure. And she said, hey, show up at the church Sunday evening. We'll be finishing up youth group, and then we'll go do confirmation. And I walked into the church, and they were doing foam finger rocket wars inside the church, right? And I thought, what is going on? I'm one and done. I'm not going to be able to do this. It just, I don't know. It just didn't click. But I stuck it out. And what I realized in that confirmation class is that even though I was significantly older than the students, like we could still relate and have conversations. And I wanted to hear the things that were going on in their life. They wanted to hear about the things going on in my life. And so I added to my volunteering and started volunteering with youth. And then it was about a year and a half later, the lady who was running youth said, hey, I'm resigning in May. And I told them, you should be the interim person. And I said, what are you talking about? So I was interim for a few months. We had a candidate we hired, but then when it came time to finalize monies, the parties couldn't agree. So they came to me and said, hey, how about you do youth ministry part-time here? We'll pay you. We'll send you to classes. That's how I got involved in YMI Youth Ministry Institute. And that was 2011. And I did part-time ministry for 5 years and did the engineering job full-time and did YMI in between that. And then in 2016, I left the engineering job and came here full-time. So it's been just over 5 years now, full-time. So
wow.
So that's the long story long.
And when Young Life opened up to you, how did that happen?
So I had some students. So the lady that resigned and said I should be interim used to be on staff with Young Life in the area. And so there were some students that when she took the job here at Grace, just naturally came over here because Young Life wasn't happening. So it came over here. And so I got to know some of the students by volunteering. And after I had taken back over, there was a student who said, "Hey, I want to get Young Life going again." And I said, "Okay." He said, "I might need some help." And I said, "Yeah, whatever you want." So I was giving him topics to talk about. And then that grew into, "Hey, why don't you just come and do the talk? And we'll do everything else." Like, okay. And so I was doing the talk for them for a little bit. And then it was, "Well, since you're here doing the talk, why don't you help with games? And well, since you're here with games, why don't you help with sound?" And then next thing you know,
familiar.
next thing you know, I'm having lunch with the area director from Young Life.
Yeah.
And he's like, "I don't know what's going on, but there's some student out here in Brandon that's starting Young Life again." And he's like, "Do you know anything about that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of do. I know the student, and I'm the one helping him." And he was like, "What?" And so he'd never heard of that before. And so I was involved in just a volunteer position for a long time with them, and am still the main volunteer leader here. We don't have a staff person. We have a couple other former students who are volunteer leaders with me. But I guess because of my age and experience, I'm the decision maker for what happens in this particular area. But it really intrigued me about Young Life because I had known about it a little bit and known that I never met a Young Life person who came to the church to say, "Hey, how do I get kids involved in your church? I'm with Young Life. This is what we do." And so I'd always heard of it as being like a competition.
Right.
Well, Young Life kids are over here, church kids are over here, they can't commingle. And that seemed weird to me. So I said, "Well, I'm involved in a church and I can be involved in Young Life to try to maybe help bridge that gap." And that's what it's been, ever since then, is just really trying to get students to understand what their faith is, and then say, "Hey, if you want to, we go only so far with Young Life, but there's, churches around. And by the time you get out of high school, there's, colleges that you're going to be able to be involved in ministries, and you're going to have to go see what different ones are like to find one that clicks with you." And so that was my job, was just to help them find that next step and make the connection in some community, but then also be able to find that next step and plug into a church. And so there's been some pretty amazing success stories in that as well. Over the years of just seeing students who were unchurched and now are involved, it's probably been the biggest blessing.
So for I guess the person who really doesn't understand Young Life or has never heard of it before, and you kind of briefly sort of went into the difference between like a Young Life and youth ministry. What would you say is the like black and white definition of Young Life?
Well, so their mission statement is that they exist to reach the farthest out kid. And so not every person who's ever been to a church has had a great experience at a church. My own brother-in-law, used to go to church as a youth group kid, and because of some things that were going on with his youth pastor at the time, he quit going to church altogether. And there are students that say, "Yeah, I don't really want to step into a church." Maybe it's because of things their parents went through, maybe it's because of things they've experienced. And so Young Life typically exists. It's called a parachurch organization, which means it typically exists outside of a church building, but there's many cases where Young Life exists right inside the church building as well. Like I'm sitting in our youth room right now, and we had our Young Life kickoff event right in here last night, at the church. And so I guess the biggest difference is that you don't go to there's not a building that is Young Life in your area. It's usually we borrow a building from the YMCA, or we'll borrow a building from a church, or we meet in people's houses. So it's like a church that exists without a building. But the structure of Young Life is worldwide, international. It's massive throughout the world. A lot of people come to know Young Life because of their summer camp program. Their camps are amazing. They're a little pricey, but the experience that students get at Young Life Camp is one that they often talk about for years. And Young Life touts it as the best summer of their life, or the best week of their life. And we've seen some amazing, breakthroughs with students at summer camps as well. But then as you get back into normal school year time, we do what we call club, which is really no different than youth group. There's music, there's games, there's a message. And then we do things called campaigners, which is essentially small groups at church. We meet as a bigger group. We talk about our week, and then guys and girls separate and talk about either a biblical topic or a social topic that might be geared directly towards what they're going through in their life. And then a leader leads them through the study and leads them through some questions as well. So they're getting elements of what it's like to be in a church, but it's just usually not associated or affiliated with the church. I have an in here because I'm a youth pastor, so I can kind of say yes. So we bought, let's see, we use Young Life's projector, but we bought the soundboard. Young Life uses our speakers, but we use their screen. So like there's this relationship that kind of exists between and of course there's checks and balances. It's not like I'm out here, on my own, but right. There's resources that are made available just because of my position at the church, and vice versa, my position with Young Life.
Well, I've known a few students who've gone through your Young Life, and they went to our church, and they are doing great as young, successful adults, and
yeah,
all in thanks to you and what you do with Young Life. So,
well, and it's a lot of people. I mean, I tell students all the time, like I'm 48, I'll be 49 this year. Good gracious. And I said, no student wants to come hang out with a 49-year-old overweight bald guy, but they do want to come hang out with their friends. And, it goes back to that earning the right to be heard is probably the biggest line I've taken from Young Life is students don't want another adult in front of them telling them what to do, but they want an adult who's going to invest time in who they are, be interested in the things that they're interested in, show up to their games, maybe buy their t-shirt, have coffee with them, and really help them navigate those next steps. And then they'll say, you know what, this is somebody that I can go to when I'm experiencing something. And those are probably some of the most amazing things is I get a text or something or a message 2 years later from somebody that's going through a rough time. Could you pray for me? Or, hey, I was trying to check out a church to go to. Do you have any recommendations? Here's where I'm at. And then really like the cream on the top of all of that is getting to be able to do weddings now for former students, whether they were at church or whether they were with Young Life. And that's such a privilege to be able to still be in their lives today.
You bring up a good point because you've been full-time now for 5-6 years.
Yep.
I'm part-time, like almost 5 years before that. And I'm not far behind you, but here we are when we're getting up into our age, and we've been doing this for a while now. How do you still keep it going? How do you feel? And you kind of hinted towards that of being inspired to keep going, but it's kind of hard sometimes, isn't it? Because you feel like you've pulled all the tricks out of the bag.
Oh yeah. I mean, Sunday night before youth group, I was Googling, uncomfortable uncomfortable games. Our message is all in, but the theme was about being uncomfortable. So I was looking for a game that's going to make kids uncomfortable. And the cool part is like, and I learned this from Sherry Leatherwood, who was doing youth ministry at Van Dyke, which is now Bay Hope, many years ago. And when I first started, I was writing every lesson I was writing myself. And I asked her about it because I used to go to Bay Hope. I used to go to Van Dyke. And so I knew her, and we ran into each other at a youth conference, and she made a comment about, well, yeah, I just use, stuff that I find online. And I was like, in my mind, I didn't say this to her. I was like, she doesn't write her own stuff. Like, what kind of youth pastor are you? But she said, because she went on as I'm thinking this, she's like, because what I found, the real ministry is being able to spend time with kids. And so if I'm spending 25 hours in my office writing small group curriculum and Bible study curriculum and youth group curriculum, I'm missing out on opportunities to hang out with kids. And she used to say, like, yeah, if I'm going to Sam's, I'll say, hey, does anybody want to go take a trip to Sam's? And I'm thinking, how is that youth ministry related? Well, it gives her an opportunity to hear conversations with them, to be, around them, to talk about stuff and really do life together, which is probably more important in youth ministry than it is to sit in front of a group of kids and say, here's what I want to tell you, here's what you need to learn. It's more about the relationship building, which, I had someone pretty early on when I asked, like, hey, do you follow up with students once they leave their ministry? And they're like, not really, there's a lot of students that come through, so we don't really, follow up. And I remember I was at a Youth Ministry Institute conference, and I was like, I was just sitting in my room, just thinking about that. Like, that doesn't sound right to me. That doesn't sound good. And it might have been right for that person in that situation. And very early on, I was like, well, I want to make sure that this is not just, hey, come hang out in youth group for 7 years, or come hang out in Young Life for 4 years. I want this to be like, I want to know you well enough where we're still communicating, when you're 20 years old, 25 years old, 30 years old.
Right.
And I have some students now who I just got to be part of the baptism of their third baby. Wow. And got asked to be a godparent. And so, like, how I could have never seen that coming, 10 years ago. And yet those relationships are really what keep things rolling. So I think, to go back to your original question, how do I keep going, is the cool part is that we literally get to meet new students every year, at least, maybe even every semester, depending upon how that goes. And every student is going through something unique to them and different to them, but it might be something that I've experienced personally, or I have a good friend that has experienced it personally. And when you get that chance to say, hey, I understand your parents are going through a divorce. My parents got divorced when I was 9. If you ever want to talk about that, I'm here. And they kind of like, oh, like, okay, I didn't think about that, but yeah, I probably do want to talk to you about that. Or, I've had students who have gone through some issues with bullying, and I've connected them to college age students now who are in ministry, because their story, was exactly like this student's story, and they're able to make those connections. So I think just the joy of that is seeing those connections and trying to keep those recurring conversations and relationships and whatnot.
Yeah.
Now the physical side of it, I got a bad knee. I can't run around as much. When we play paintball, it's like, hey, everybody shoot Greg. He's a big target and he's slow. And so you have to just take some of that, They pick on me in 9 square. They hit it lower. I can't get it. Dodgeball, I get aimed at, Gaga ball, I'm the first one they try to get out. So yeah. So that part,
about 2 or 3 days to recover from a lock-in too.
It does. A leave is my friend. Yeah, I definitely taken a leave after youth group, and we Super Bowl Sunday we watch the game here, and typically adults will come and hang out a little bit, but they always leave by halftime. But this year, for some reason, I had a group of 3 adults, older adults, and they stayed for the entire game. And my students were like, Greg, when are they going to leave? I thought we're going to get to like play some football and stuff. I'm like, I don't know, but they'll definitely leave at halftime. And they didn't. So they said, let's go play football out in the parking lot. Like, okay, cool. Well, I said, I'll be all-time QB. But when we got out there, they were even teams if I played. So I had to play. And like, oh, you guard this kid who's small, but way too fast for me to be guarding. But I couldn't turn off that. So I was trying to keep up with him. And I woke up the next day and thought, well, that was stupid. But, for that, 45 minutes of running around with students, it's something that they remember and they're going to think about. And like, yeah, I remember when Chris stayed up all night at that lock-in, or when Greg, went out and played football with us. And those are the things that keep me going.
Yeah. Well, other than the physical sort of struggles, what other kind of challenges have you experienced doing youth ministry that really kind of like just were pretty strenuous on you? Has there been anything?
Well, when I look back at, so I guess it was 10 years ago, actually right about this time 10 years ago is when the church approached me about working part-time and going to class, and I was working a full-time job. And I don't know how I could do that now. And so I don't know if that's, like a combination of being older and being maybe less energetic than I was 10 years ago. But I don't know how I was able to do that. Now, fortunately, My wife was super understanding, very generous with my time being away, and made it possible for me to do all of those things that I was doing. She was involved in nursing school. And, we always say like, oh, it worked out in God's timing, which I usually think God's timing is wrong, because I want it quicker, sooner, faster, right? But in this case, the timing couldn't have been more perfect between her finishing her RN degree and becoming a nurse full time, and me leaving the engineering job and coming here full time. But so I think I have had people along the way say, you need to find time for yourself. You need to not say yes to everything. You're gonna burn out. My goodness, I've heard that word so many times about burnout, and I do see glimpses of that. And there's probably seasons where I'm like, wow, but then we're into the next thing, like
Right.
Summertime for us is a grind. We do lots of things over the summer, and each of those individual events, like, it's Tuesday night and you're doing an event Wednesday, and a kid says, hey, can I still go? Like, yeah, I want them to be able to go, but I have to find somebody else to drive at 11 o'clock at night because we don't have enough drivers. And so those little pieces of it, like, would be nicer if those weren't there. But, at the end of the day, I just look at those as opportunities to have conversations with students about, hey, we need to find a driver. Can your parents go? And, I've met parents specifically because their student wanted to go to paintball, and the only way that they could go is if that parent drove, because it was, the last hour, and they did, and they had a good time, and they've been involved. So, I try not to look at those strenuous things as things that are negative, but try to find ways, how can I use this as a positive, or how can I take something positive out of this that's going to make, the next time I encounter this a little easier to deal with.
When the bottom kind of fell out last year, it was a challenge for all of us.
Yes.
What specifically, other than the obvious, happened for you in a way that you said, oh no, I got to do something else, or, rethink ministry altogether? How did you go about that?
Well, it was, I had just done a wedding for a former student in Louisiana. My wife and I were driving home on a Sunday, and we didn't have youth that night because we were driving back. And then the next Sunday was the Sunday before spring break. And so we had 2 Sundays where we were off. Well, that's, I think, the 15th of March, 2020 is when everything really shut down completely. And at first, I thought, well, this will be fun to do Zoom a little bit. And, Zoom searches increased, and games on Zoom or scavenger hunts, all those things. I had a list of stuff, and I was doing that. And I was trying to run Young Life online that way, and our campaigners that way, and our youth group and our small group and our Bible study all on Zoom. And so it was a pretty, daunting schedule, but honestly, like, I didn't go anywhere. So I was at the house. So, like, what else am I going to do? But that was really only sustainable for maybe 2 months, because once the end of school rolled around and then summer hit, everybody was gone. Like, yeah. I just didn't, and I get it. Like, people were trying to get out and do things. Stuff was starting to open back up a little bit at that point. But it was before we hit that huge spike the summer of 2020. And so, like, I was still looking forward to doing some summer activities. We were planning summer activities. We were planning summer camp for Young Life and for church. And then as we rolled into that mid-June timeline, and camp was like, we're still going to delay. And then Florida blew up, everything shut down. And I was really hopeless at that point. I had tried a couple of things, and like a watch party on Netflix. And I think the most kids I had were 4, and 2 of them were my own kid. So I tried that for a month, and I let that die. And we were doing game nights, and I started doing some alumni nights for my former youth group students and my former Young Life students. And that was really only attended by 5 to 10 maybe.
Yeah.
And I just wanted them to know that, hey, in the middle of this, you're not being forgotten about. But that also hit its, limit. Now, there were some students that, we'd still get together and talk on Sundays, every Sunday evening, until we started doing youth group again in person. And it was nice. It's students that I've known for a long time, and we have a great relationship. And but the Young Life one went from weekly to twice a month to once a month to it was gone. And that's kind of the same thing with the movie night. We did the same thing, and same thing with Sunday evenings as well. So, now that I try not to say back to normal, I try not to say new normal. I just try to look at it as like, what are it's almost like those cooking shows where they open a basket. Like, what do I have to cook with? Like, what do we have to work with, and what can we do this season, knowing that, next season might look completely different. And I think if anything, it's taught me to be a little more flexible, still have a plan, but be ready to deviate from that plan if necessary.
Lower your expectations a little bit.
Yes, definitely some of that. Absolutely. Yeah. Especially when, I was texting for my Young Life alumni. Gosh, I think I was texting about 90 students a week. And, towards the bulk of it, there was 4 to 5 students that would join. I'm like, I know they don't have anything to do on it was a Wednesday night, I think. I'm like, come on, man. It's 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night. If you're going out later. If you're at dinner, you're already home. So that those expectations, like, yeah, I had to adjust, where I thought it was going to be to what reality was.
And we recovered a little bit.
Yes.
But we're still struggling. And
yes.
Do you still, speaking of expectations, do you still have expectations for it to get back to normal, or is that just out the window and you're just taking it week by week? I mean, and I don't say that just about your ministry, or ask that just about your ministry, but in church in general. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, with students, you do need families too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, so we're in you've probably experienced these seasons where, man, I have 3 times as many middle schoolers as I have high schoolers. And then it kind of hits the middle point. And then right now we're the other way. We have very few middle schoolers and we have a ton of high schoolers right now. And so a lot of them were in middle school last year. So my middle school and high school like switched. Mm-hmm. And I would say, like, my expectations of numbers, because this happens all the time, right? Like, people are like, oh, I don't care about numbers. We just want to know that lives are being changed. But when you say, oh yeah, we went to Rainbow River, the first question they ask you, how many students did you take? It doesn't matter. Like, did you have fun? Did you get lightning? What'd you have for lunch? It was, how many students did you take? And if you give them an answer that they think should be higher, like, oh, like, you could tell that judgment. So I don't think that's ever going to change. But for me, I think what's been most difficult is when you know that there are students out there who you have relationships with that aren't involved. And I sometimes there's relationships inside of youth group. Like, believe it or not, folks, there's cliques in youth groups, as much as you don't want there to be. And sometimes one clique can be not nice to this one, and that makes somebody not want to go. And if one person says in this group they're not going to go, and they text their friends, the other friends are not going to go either. So right. I've learned that it's very much critical mass, positive and negative. So yeah, but I'm trying not to use those words, new normal. I'm trying to still focus on the students that are here, and know that encourage them to tell their friends to come hang out with us, so that at least we're meeting some new people. But then on the church side of things, we had been talking 2 or 3 years here before the pandemic about needing an online presence, and we kind of looked into little bits and pieces of it, but it seemed like it was a little overwhelming. We were going to have to make capital expenditures for equipment. We were going to need somebody to kind of help run it. which meant either a new volunteer or maybe a new paid position. And so like it never seemed to be something that we could just like reach out. It was never that close.
Right.
Well, then pandemic hit, and the first 2 Sundays we Facebook lived in the parsonage living room, and we thought, okay, there's a better way to do this. Unfortunately, our lead pastor at the time is a very techie person, very gold, very organized person, and I shouldn't say he loved, but I'm going to say he loved spending time looking for better ways to do what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we found out that, hey, we could use iPhone cameras and run them through this switcher. And it seemed like each week we were trying something a little bit more, a little bit different. and it worked, because we were not meeting in person until late October of 2020. And then we noticed that our content was one camera at the very back of the sanctuary. And when we were meeting in person again, the people online were just kind of seeing like a bird's eye view of the sanctuary. And it wasn't we watched them online. It wasn't very enticing. Like I wouldn't have stayed online. So that's when we added in the other cameras. We added in the switcher to try to make it feel different. And then we tried pre-recorded services for Advent. And we were actually completely pre-recording them. We would still post them at the same time as live church. All the content was the same, but the cameras were up in my face, and I'm looking into the camera and I'm talking to people. And it wasn't like it was way back in the back of the room and the people couldn't tell who I was.
Right.
And so the personal aspect of that online was great. But we were basically doing 2 services a week. We were doing the online pre-recorded and then the live service on Sunday. But we did that for a period of time, well into 2021, and then went back to the live service. We have some live music now, socially distanced and whatnot, and multiple cameras set up. And somebody is sitting behind the tablet, switching between different camera shots, adding graphics, and things like that to try to help make that online thing better. So the pandemic forced us to reach out and grab what we had been meaning to do. And so I guess in a nutshell, we're trying to use that same approach. What are other things that we had been putting off because it just wasn't within our grasp now that we can basically blame the pandemic for? Like, well, because of the pandemic, we tried this and it worked or it didn't work. Or how can we revisit doing, Relay for Life, for instance? We didn't have an in-person Relay for Life, so we did kind of a satellite one, and kids came here and we washed cars and we watched online, and we set up Gaga Ball like we would have, and we played and we hung out and we had food. And so like, what are those things that we can do that we can blame on the pandemic to try something new? And I think the big thing with that is we have to be able to let it go if it's not successful. We have to give it a good effort, but if we've given it a good effort and it's not successful, then I think we have to be okay to let it go. And maybe it comes back later, or maybe it comes back different, or maybe it doesn't come back at all. So I think that's been helpful.
I think one of the things because we were in the same boat, we were talking many years about the advancement in tech and online. Mm-hmm. And then when the pandemic hit, we were forced to do that.
Right.
But I think in this whole recovery process of getting people back in, we've enabled them to a certain degree,
Yeah.
And one of the things my students always ask me is, why don't we ever start, streaming Sunday mornings when we do our worship time? I'm like, because you guys would never come.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I know a lot of people are legitimately still hesitant about coming, but then you do know that there's those people out there that will be like, well, I can just go back and watch the service later and go on the boat or wherever I do.
That's true. That's true.
I'm not condemning that.
Yeah.
We would love to see you in person more than anything.
Yeah. Well, and I've been guilty of it. Like if I'm listening to a podcast, hopefully people listening to this one won't do it, but I'll put it on my phone and I'll set my phone down and I'll do something else while I'm listening to it. But I'm not hearing it. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I'm hearing it, but I'm not listening to it. And I think that's, there are people that sit in front of the computer every Sunday when service starts for us, and they go through the process. I host on Sunday morning, so we show it on Facebook and we show it through Chop, and I'm the host. So I go in and type things to people and, hey, how you doing? Say hi to people. And like my mother is on every Sunday. I get to say hi, mama, in the chat every single Sunday, and she watches it at 10 o'clock and it's live for her. But there's other people that, you see pictures on Instagram and they're on the boat today. And so you never know if they watched it later that day or not, or they, I've had so many people like, oh, I've been trying to get back, on campus, or I've been trying to, get back involved, and we just got things going on, and like, it's a vacation here, or it's, and those things are good. I mean, I think any type of that, especially when we went through 8 months or 9 months of not being able to feel like we could do those things, I think it's important. But so how do we feel like we're still reaching that segment, and helping them find community? We could sit down and watch, thousands of pastors do sermons on Sundays or Wednesdays or Thursdays or Tuesdays or whatever. But like, are they feeling that community? I could sit down and listen to everything Jesus had to say, but if all I did is get up and walk away and never experienced the meal beforehand, or never experienced the healing, or never experienced, the animosity that he did and how he overcame that, I'm missing out on a part of that. So is it possible to do that community piece online? I don't know yet. And I don't know, maybe this generation of students who feel connected to people online can help us with that. I've got students who say, oh yeah, my friend said something. I was like, oh, did they go to school with you? No. Like, well, where do you know them from? Oh, we're friends on Instagram. Like you knew each other and now you're friends on Instagram? Like, no, we met on Instagram, but we're friends. Like, in their mind, that's a friend of theirs.
Friendship,
so
yeah.
So in my mind, I find people who I know on Instagram already and say, hey, we should be friends on Instagram. But in their minds, they find somebody that has similar interests or posts something that's funny and they follow them, and now that's their friend. So I think there is a way that we can find community online, but I don't know if we found a good way to do that yet. And I don't think every social media platform is a good place for that, but I don't necessarily think every social media platform is a bad place for that either. So it's just trying to find a way to do that.
In the 5 years that you've been full-time, what's the biggest change you have seen in your students? Like when you first got in there full-time and you saw that this was like, for me, I thought it was kind of like maybe bullying or something was a big issue.
Oh, I see.
But what is it now? What is that like that current sort of cultural wall that kind of is like something that they're facing now? Because I feel like it's changed, because you brought up social media, and that's what I'm saying. And in the time that we've been in ministry, that's just grown immensely. You know?
Absolutely. Yep.
So I'm just wondering, what is it for you that you've seen as part of that challenge for students now?
I think it's, I don't know the right way to say it, but, trying to find their place, like where do they fit in, where, I was just talking with my pastor this morning about the difference between fitting in and belonging. So like when students are fitting in, they have to change something about who they are to look like the group that they're trying to fit in with. But when they're belonging, they come as they are and are accepted because of who they are. They belong versus fitting in. So I still think that that's probably one of the big ones. This has been a couple of years ago now, but I was blown away when even some relatives of mine and some students would take pictures and post them. And I thought, wow, they just look completely different than how I normally see them. So I was like, what kind of camera do you have? Because this is one place where it's good to be old, because you can be ignorant about it, even though I know what they're doing, just to see, like, that's an amazing camera because you look totally different on that camera than, on my camera. Oh, no, it's a filter. Like, oh, like, do you do that for every picture? Well, only the ones I post on Instagram. Like, okay. Like, how many times do you have to take that shot? Like, I took like 90 for one picture, and I was like, okay, so here's a spot I'm way out of touch. I don't have the patience to take 90 pictures, nor to look through 90 and then find the one that I want to enhance to make look right. And so I think that that's probably a big part of it, like feeling like they have to have the perfect picture. I know students who say, like, I see a picture and I post, or I like it, and then I realize a week later, so it's gone. Like, I was like, oh, you should see this picture of my friend, and I show it. I'm like, oh, it's not there. It's like, hey, where'd your picture go? I took it down. Why? Well, it only had 75 likes. So I'm like, oh, so is that a thing? Like, you can only keep it up? Like, yeah, it's got to have this many, or you have to take it down. Like, okay,
brutal.
Maybe that's in those things when you accept Instagram, you scroll through like and hit accept. But so that made me realize, like, they feel like they need to portray the perfect part of who they are in somebody else's eyes. But I will say this, I've noticed a shift in that. I've seen more and more people posting things about being happy in their own skin. A lot of exercise people, are posting things like, I saw one girl's post, I don't know who she is, but some fitness person, and she took a picture of herself, and the way that she was turned and the way that she was positioned and the camera angle, I mean, she looked a certain way. And then the next picture on that Instagram post was her not posing, not holding the camera a certain way, not sucking in, and she looked like a completely different person. And she said, that's the difference that, people are trying to making themselves look like something, that they're not. And so I have seen a shift recently where more and more people are posting things about being happy with how you look. I might get this wrong. I think it might be Selena Gomez who posted some pictures of herself, like at the beach, not touched up or something like that. I don't know if she was the person or not, but like, people who in Hollywood, especially, who have to feel like they have to look a certain way or they get passed over, for them to be able to take this and say, it's okay to be who you are, right, I think will be helpful for kids. And so I don't want to say we're out of that, but I think that's what we've been through most recently. And so now, I guess I'm anxious to see what the next big, crisis is going to be.
Yeah. And you said it well too. People are trying to fit in, and, they just need to find a place where they belong as who they are. And, youth ministry is a good place to start, right?
Yeah, it should be. Yeah. We should be a place where everybody can belong. Absolutely.
You don't have to fit in. It's just who you are. Right. You belong here, right?
Yep, exactly.
Greg, what are you going to do with yourself? What are you going to do when you grow up?
I know. Well, I made the mistake of reading. Actually, I had a former youth's mom send me this book that he read, Irresistible Revolution by Shane Claiborne. I don't know if you've read that one yet or not. Yeah. It's several years old now. I mean, maybe 8 years old, maybe at this point. I'm not sure. And he basically went out to where people were in need and found ways to get past the legal aspects of things, found ways to get past the loopholes, the red tape, and created, a community center basically where people can be witnessed to, where people can feel like they belong, where they can learn a skill, where they can find a place to sleep, where they can find something to eat. So I always think, one of these days that I'm going to do something like that. There was an old, I don't know if it was Winn-Dixie or Hannaford or Sweet Bay or something like that up on Bloomingdale Avenue and Bell Shoals. And I thought it was vacant for the longest time. Now it's Navigator Academy. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy that place and I'm going to create that community center here in this building. And then I never called the number on, because in my head, I'm like, ooh, if God really wants this to happen, I'll call him up and they'll be like, this is a great idea. Why don't you just take the building? But that's where I wanted God's timing to be really, really long. And so I never did that. So I don't know. I guess I would say if I had to pick something, I would want to do something like that where I'm around people and, trying to make a difference in their life. So I'm an engineer by degree, but I also like to cook on the grill. And so me and my buddies from the manufacturing company talked about starting a company that makes legitimate stainless steel grills and fire pits and things not the kind that you get at Home Depot for $200 and 6 months later it's rusted and burned out. Like legitimate stainless steel grills, and so that's on the agenda. And then I have a buddy who is a former Hormel salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
Currently is retired and creating barbecue. And we talked about a design for a roaster that would roast like large amounts of food, thinking about like, how do I cook pork butts for a church picnic in a smoker that only holds 4? Well, you have to start, 3 days ahead of time and find a way to keep them and warm them back up. And so that's a design that we already have on paper. I just haven't designed yet. So I want to do that. And then my wife wants to move to the mountains and take care of retired German Shepherd puppy dogs.
What a plan.
So I don't know how all that works together, but if we could all work at the same time, then that'd be the home run.
Well, God's timing. You said it.
Yeah, exactly. I need God's timing and God's financing, I think, on that one.
There you go.
Sure.
There you go. It's a lot of patience and finance.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Greg, man, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, sir.
You did have the first Young Life last night.
Yes.
And it went well?
It was good. Yes. We had a very large senior class last year. And so we have some work to do to try to get our numbers back up. But the group that was here was excited about being here, shared it on social media. I had some former youth who had moved out of the area who came back, and they came and brought some friends. And so it was a great time for sure.
If somebody is interested that's watching this, or maybe they think that their student may be interested in Young Life, how would they go about finding out information about your next gathering or any other information? So
we're on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. Those are the best ways. And then they can text me. I can give you my number over the podcast, and you can put that out there. It's 813-695-6938. And if they search for Brandon area Young Life on the social media platforms, it'll pop up, and message us on Facebook, and I can get them that information. But it's every Monday night from 8 o'clock until 9 o'clock. The first Monday of each month we're here at Grace, and then the other 3 Mondays of the month we're at a house in the Fishhawk area. Well, this Monday's Labor Day, so we're not meeting on Labor Day, and so our next event will be the 13th of September at a house in Fishhawk. But yeah, they can reach out on social media. They'll definitely want to reach out to you if you're specifically going to somebody's house, because yes. Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for doing this with me today. All right, yeah, my pleasure, man. Good talking.